small business owner, and that person probably didn't want their next, the next generation to go into it. And it's interesting because now it's totally different. Now entrepreneurship, it's still a means of survival for so many people, but it's more than that. It's a way to self-actualize. It's a way to be creative. And someone mentioned to me today, someone that works at Shopify, Lindsay Craig, mentioned this Andy Warhol quote that in the future, I think it's Andy Warhol, everyone's going to be famous for 15 minutes. And I thought about it sort of in the context of entrepreneurship, that if every single person commercialized their hobby, if every single person, whatever their gift was, maybe it's they make beautiful blankets for their children, or maybe someone makes the greatest, soup. Imagine everyone took that thing that they make that is special and unique and shared it with the world. Entrepreneurship. What if in the future everyone would be an entrepreneur? What would that look like? And I think that would be a world of a lot of creativity, a lot of great passion, a lot of people doing their life's work rather than sort of having this job. And it's interesting to see how that connotation of entrepreneurship and what that means has changed from generation to generation.
That concept of having somebody in your family who sort of influenced that, I think is so important. And, we talk a lot about like the lemonade stand, which is something I hope isn't sort of going away in this pandemic era. But are you seeing people sort of doing that now, like as an intergenerational thing, where people are working with their, their older family members to start shops, or working even with their kids to start shops? And also, like, what do you think it is that somebody instills in their children that makes them say, like, I could be this entrepreneur? And, if somebody out there is trying to think of, I'm about to have a kid in May, and I'm trying to think, like, what am I going to teach her to make her want to, like, make this world more malleable than it appears, to make it her own? What do you find that can be taught to kids that help them drive this idea of that they can take the world on as their own?
Tobi and I have this mutual friend. His name is John Hope Bryant. He's an amazing man, and he created Operation Hope. And we're doing this. We're creating a program together with John to create 1 million Black businesses with Shopify and Operation Hope, Black-owned businesses. And one of the things he talks about is this idea. I think it comes from The Tipping Point, or one of Gladwell's books, where he talks about that 5% of any population can encourage the other 95% if they have conviction. And I think about this idea of role modeling all the time when it comes to entrepreneurship, that people that know entrepreneurs, that have encountered an entrepreneur at some point in their life, they almost have the audacity, or they feel like they have the permission to kind of try it. And we did this show over the summer called I Quit on Discovery Channel. It's sort of a Shopify Discovery collaboration. And the winner of the show was this guy named Mike D. He's from Durham, North Carolina. He makes this amazing barbecue sauce, Mike D's barbecue sauce. And they didn't actually show this on the show, unfortunately. But off sort of camera, one of the producers had asked Mike, "Hey, why did you start this business, this hot sauce, this barbecue sauce company?" And he said, "Well, I love barbecue sauce, but that's not really the reason. The reason is that in my entire life, I never knew an entrepreneur, and I never knew a small business owner. There was no one in our community in Durham, North Carolina, that had a business like that, and that he wanted to do so partially to make money and partially to share his gift with the world, but also because he wanted his 2 daughters. He wanted his daughters to see that if they have something that they care about, that they can use entrepreneurship as a vehicle in which to achieve some sort of success, or to distribute that to the world, and that entrepreneurship is accessible. And as much as we try to make it really easy at Shopify to do so, there still is a barrier to entry if you don't know anyone who's done it, if you don't have a peer group or someone in your family that says, "Oh, well, I started a business when I was your age," or "I did something like that." And so this idea of influencing others to try this, I think, is really, really powerful.
Let me actually underscore this because I don't think this point can be emphasized too much. Harley's exactly right. Like my grandmother ran a printing business, I grew up just having entrepreneurship as a tool in my toolbox, so to speak. Right? It's just something that I knew someone who did this, and they freely talked about it. And if you do the funnel analysis here, a very small group of people can say that they grew up and had entrepreneurship given to them as one tool, which may end up fitting the task at hand. I ended up encountering entrepreneur-shaped holes in my life and knew how to fill them. And so this is honestly a bigger project that needs to be done. I think the internet is doing a little bit, actually a lot right now for this. And I think that this is partly why we see just more participation. For first time in this century, the number of small business formation is going up again. It's like we finally bent this curve,
Wow.
like just now. And so that's hugely impactful. But it just goes to show, like, think about just all the opportunities that people just didn't know how to take advantage of, right? It's tremendously hard to be the best in the world at something. It's a very small group of people who can reach this or even attempt for going for it. But the wonderful thing is what you really need to start some meaningful income stream and is 1,000 true fans. And that's something you can generate much easier. What we see is, like, often people, like, if you actually take 3 different backgrounds together, like 3 different interests which you just happen to have, there might be some product business, there might be a Substack newsletter or something that you can create with that. And I think that's true now. That was just as true 10 years ago. But, like, I think the point is that then the impulse is there. Like, you need to be able, like, the tools need to also do their job.
So I'm super fascinated about how big software maybe hasn't gone in the direction that I would have expected for e-commerce. What I would have imagined would happen with a lot of commerce is that the companies with the most money, the biggest companies who can buy the best software, can pour the most into like online channels, that they would always be the winners, and that we would kind of see the big boxification of commerce, the way that Walmart butted out a lot of Main Street businesses, and that we might see that same thing online. And it seemed like that was happening for a little while with Amazon, but now it feels like there's that the rebels have been armed, that the tools are there. Why has this sort of new wave of software permitted people to compete with those giants? And maybe just talk a little bit about that concept of, like, why software is so important to this, and what are the ways that smaller businesses are able to actually compete with the biggest businesses in the world when they're equipped with the right software? Like, is it the human touch element that they can combine with the technology, or what is it that allows them to compete with those big players?
I mean, this is a really big topic, and you have to get at this from multiple angles. I would also suggest that I think we are in the opening paragraphs of chapter 2 in a very long book on this topic. Like, there's certainly an easy to defend worldview which says that there's exactly like the internet will eventually converge on a single, like, let's say, search engine or single social network and potentially a single retailer. Certainly, there's a lot of scale advantages that come from this. But the world doesn't, like, change so much based on just what is sensible. In fact, the entire concept of entrepreneurship is fundamentally not sensible. Like, you're working hundreds of hours just so you don't have to work for someone else for 40 hours a week. You make it sound like a raw deal, Tobi. But it is. I think, and we are really quite careful. I think, in all our communications, to not over glorify it, because I think that's also wrong. It's entrepreneurship is really a means that it's a path best traveled by the people for who it's necessary to travel it. Like, there's some energy and burning desire to embark on it, because the odds are stacked against you. If you think about just the particular thing that you're building, like, is the chance that this new business you're starting going to succeed? It's very low. But is the chance that you come away better from the experience, better able to do the next thing you're doing? That's almost certainly total, right? And therein lies the value. We're seeing this a lot. I mean, in many cases, some of our biggest plus customers, just hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, are started like a Shopify store number 6 by the person, right? Who ended up founding it. And to me, that's hugely inspiring. As it comes to the sort of rebel alliance here, I mean, this is sort of a turn of phrase, and of course, be sort of invoking the Star Wars movies a little bit. When we first got the internet, that was the first time you could put something, like could put up a website and would be able to communicate with people you never met or don't have a phone number for outside of your hometown, which was meaningful because it was in a small town. Shopify is sort of like, let's bring that internet forward. Let's build a business model which aligns our interests with that of everyone on the platform, and where we can put a lot of things together and just say, you know what, because of the marginal cost of software and so on, like through all these millions of businesses that are succeeding now at this scale, we can reinvest all of this money, and we can build the things that will make a meaningful difference again to the success of everyone who's using us, and it creates this virtuous cycle, which is awesome. Which is a different virtuous cycle than if your objective would be to try to capture most of the profits of a particular market. And I actually don't know which one of those is going to succeed. I hope there's room for both of the approaches. It doesn't actually I don't actually think about this in terms of winning so much because it's not, they can both be true at the same time. But I think it behooves us all to cheer for the small businesses, because something like 80% of all people work for small businesses. Like we always like ignore them. Like, I mean, people tend to invoke entrepreneurs and SMBs, but sort of in the very abstract, not in the concrete. Concretely, most of the people are employed by them. we kind of need them for the viability of all of our economies. So I think it's great when people build business models where they open up markets to as many other people to succeed as possible. I think the internet should yield more of that.
Yeah.
One thing also that I think is so important that Tobi mentioned is there's also this idea that to be successful, quote unquote, as an entrepreneur, you have to be the next, Gymshark or Allbirds. But remember that for so many people, for every 26 seconds, this is a real stat, 26 seconds, a new entrepreneur gets their first sale on Shopify. And for many of those entrepreneurs, their definition of success is also not necessarily being the next Gymshark, although they may want to be. It may just be putting food on the table. It may just be the ability to not work at that job they absolutely hate. It may be the ability just to put their daughter into ballet lessons or the kids into some sort of sport that they otherwise wouldn't be able to afford. And so that as a concept, I think gets lost a little bit in the hype of some of these big DTC brands, which are amazing. The other thing that's worthwhile pointing out is Tobi talked about the supply side of entrepreneurship, that there are more people starting.
Say, like, that's a recommendation to people, because it probably works slightly less well than presenting the polished, we've got everything figured out view. But I don't think that should be our style. It's sort of be the change you seek is a rather important sentence to me.
And I think there's a direct connection. Authentic brands and the ones that we've seen do really well, the people behind the brands that just brought themselves. There's a lot of talk, of course, around like things like Kylie Cosmetics or Jeffree Star. One of the things that I think that changed in terms of like these celebrities or influencers building real brands on Shopify or anywhere for that matter, is that they brought an authenticity that traditionally you hadn't seen before. You'd see, some random, famously Brad Pitt had a toothbrush in the 80s that he was endorsing, that there was no connection to it. But the reason that Jeffree Star has built one of the greatest cosmetic brands on the planet is because Jeffree started doing makeup tutorials on YouTube and then realized that he actually can go ahead and create his own makeup, and he can do, he can actually sell those to the audience of people. Everything about the Jeffree Star brand or even the Kylie brand is really authentic. And when you compare that or juxtapose that to something like Sephora, the reason you have a different connection to it is because one provides this sort of perfect model, unapproachable version of a brand. And say what you want about Kylie, whether or not she had some assistance because of her fame or not, she really did create a brand that is an extension of her. And Jeffree certainly did the same thing as well. And so I think it's not only important just from a society perspective to have more honesty about who you are and your failures, and where vulnerability is more of a strength than it is a weakness, but actually it's also really, really good business.
To that end, we talked a little bit about what it's like for a founder trying to go through that, like those vulnerability moments and deal with those challenges. But what do you tell your teammates, especially if somebody, when you're a founder talking to people who aren't the founders, who don't have, as much of the reward to reap if things do succeed, but basically share in a lot of the failure if things don't go so well? What do you find works for talking to team members? You guys have run your own businesses now with Shopify, going through its own ups and downs. How can you sort of keep morale high, especially amongst members who don't have, maybe as much like equity in the game, but have plenty of skin?
One of the things about Shopify that I think people are beginning to understand a little bit, because frankly, we're talking a bit more about it, is a vast majority of the people that work at Shopify are founders and entrepreneurs themselves. I see people like, Farhan and a bunch of Frankie, and it's just a bunch of people on this call right now that work at Shopify that are listening to us right now. So Shopify is a collection of people who otherwise would be doing that would be running their own business, in many cases very successfully. And we just decided to throw in together because we think we can have a larger impact. So that idea that that we have founders coming to work at Shopify who then treat Shopify as if it's their own company, that feel this inherent ownership of it, not just with equity, but a real emotional connection to this idea that, the world is better off with more entrepreneurs, and we feel this responsibility to create more entrepreneurs and to sort of quote unquote arm these rebels, because otherwise the world is all boring and we're all going to be buying from marketplaces and department stores all day, and that's not interesting. However, once you come to Shopify, one of the things I think that becomes really apparent is this idea of requalifying every year. And Tobi and I talk about this even for ourselves, certainly for me, and Tobi says this all the time, that he has to requalify every year to ensure that every year he is still the best candidate to be the CEO of Shopify. And that weight, that onus is heavy. But when you're doing with a group of people who deeply inspire you, who also deeply want to requalify with this incredible growth mindset, unlike any other environment that I've ever encountered, I think you end up with this incredible place where people can stay for a very long time. And Josh, you've covered Silicon Valley and technology companies for as long as I've known you with TechCrunch. One of the things that you and I have talked about, actually we had a conversation years ago at Whistler, I think at some tech conference, you talked about that you felt the average tenure at Shopify was just longer than most other companies. And that's correct. We do have people that stay with us for a very, very long time. And what that allows a lot of people to do is for them to keep requalifying, but also to have have 10 years worth of career development every single year. And I think have that if you jump around.
I think people come to Shopify for the people, but stay for the mission, right? Like this is one of the most incredible advantages that that Shopify just has. Like the thing they're doing is really, really important. I think this is easier to talk about now than it was because after COVID, because it just was a little bit more opaque. But like the externalities of Shopify's success are more entrepreneurship happening in the world, right? Like it's all kind of so good. And I think that's really, really easy to fall in love with, like, because certainly like the people, lots of people at Shopify did very, very well, and like are not showing up for the paychecks, right? Like they are interested in working on something that they are going to be incredibly proud of at the end of their career, potentially not just the particular work, but the downstream effects that the work had. This sort of design a company and its business models with all the externalities, with an awareness of all the externalities, is something that I think in general most industries don't do well enough. So like again, it is like if you look at just retail is a huge opportunity. Like it's like what is $2 trillion digital retail? It's probably going to be $4 trillion or something. It's like the numbers are, I don't even know how to write so many zeros. I'd get bored and distracted before I'm done. So it's like this is an enormous opportunity. Usually when you have a space, then people look at it and it's like, again, they say, cool, that is an amazing space. How am I going to like get most of that? Like that's really what you build a company around in a normal sense. And let me just say, like, I think that's an easier company to build. Like it's much easier to accrue the benefits of a very valuable field to yourself. We are building a business model and a company around sharing the opportunity instead of using it for ourselves. I mean, don't get me wrong, Shopify is a very good business, especially now due to the scale of a market itself. But that's harder to do. That's a harder thing to do. Like that's you're signing up for significantly harder challenges if that's the thing you're engaged at. And so that's a bit of a subtle point. And it usually takes people probably like a year or two looking at Shopify until it somehow clicks that this nourishes like more parts of their interests than just being surrounded by caring, hardworking, and smart and impressive people, which is obviously incredible if you can pull it off. But like, so I think this is why tenure is high. This is why care is high. This is why, like, I think there's a lot of alignedness. And again, when we get to work with incredible merchants, incredible entrepreneurs, again, such an like incredibly inspiring people, like really every direction you look, and that's an amazing situation.
So you talked a little bit earlier about like making people feel like they're founders, like that they're part owners in a business, regardless of sort of the equity stake. And so I wanted to ask, how do you sort of deputize people to be leadership? Because I think you guys have done an incredible job of building this sort of wider bench. It's not just you, Tobi. It's Harley and the rest of the co-founding team that feel like they're the leaders of Shopify. It's not like a single point of failure. And I think that that's so important for a lot of brands because there's so many challenges, so many things you have to tackle, especially if you're running your own shop. Like you're juggling a million things, but it can be natural to sort of like hoard power and control over something because it's your baby. You don't want to give up, and you don't want somebody else to suddenly make a decision that could move it in the wrong direction. But by not giving up any of that power, by like keeping an iron grip on everything, you're just letting actually a lot slip through your fingers. And so how have you thought about, Tobi, like deputizing other figures in the business to feel like they're part owners? And what would you say for advice for e-commerce leaders out there who maybe are like a sole founder or CEO to help make sure that there are other people in their business that they trust, that they can rely on, and that they're open to delegating some of that power and responsibility to, so that they can be a stronger team together?
I mean, this is probably the hardest question to answer in the entire world of business. I actually don't think there is a formula to do it, and I also wouldn't say that I have a particular line on the truth on this particular matter. Whenever I'm thinking about my failures, it's usually the failures around doing this better. I guess I have a very strong sense that real progress comes from just alignment. Sorry, I'm losing my voice right now. I guess the point, what you want to do is, again, after if you can pull it off, that people fall in love with the same problem and the same mission, then what you need is context. Like there's a couple of things we talk very casually around Shopify about. Chesterton's fence is a mental model that is worth reading up on, right? Because we built this company and we build it in a hurry sometimes, and so some of the parts we built were just put up in a hurry because we need to put up something, and some parts we very, very carefully considered. And when especially new leaders come along, it's really important for them to understand which walls of the building they can take the sledgehammer to, and then which parts they need to be careful about, right? And so anyway, the point is, there's a broader mission, and that's quite clear. There's a role underneath this about like an area, and that needs to be clear. And this is the way I think everyone wants to know, how can I make my work best to the benefit of the collective? And as long as you spend the time with everyone to just explain, here's like the direction, here's looking at the plans, like make sure, like agree that this is the right way. I mean, you build the trust battery, and once the battery is fully charged, you don't need to do that anymore. And I think this is where so much of the potential speed in companies like this comes from.
We talk a lot about the trust battery. It's an interesting analogy or a metaphor to use, because what tends to happen is most people come to the company and we're at 50% trust battery when you come in, and the more you deliver on time, you do what you say, you do the things that you said you would do, trust battery goes up. And once you get to that point where there is really high trust, whether it's 100% or it's 99%, somewhere in that range, you get autonomy. And that's where actually everything you loved about being a founder of your own thing, you can actually do at Shopify as well. And the reverse is true, of course, too. But by not doing what you say you're going to do, by failing to live up to your expectations and what you've committed to, eventually the battery does get to a point where it may not be able to be recharged like an old cell phone battery. And at that point, it just, that's when it's better to sort of part ways. But remember, one of the things that is so unique about Shopify, and many of you that are listening now, it's the same in your own business too. It is amazing to do something very challenging, something very difficult with people you deeply respect. And that is amazing. And that's, a lot of people have that with their jobs. But the added benefit to the mission of Shopify is that we think that what we're doing, the actual mission of the company, helping more people discover and get deep into entrepreneurship, that connects, like the Venn diagram of a lot of our personal interests and the company's mission. There is massive overlap. And it's not to say that other technology companies don't have that, but if I was selling, I don't know, accounting software, it'd be cool, but I wouldn't feel like, wait a second, we are actually arming the rebels. We are creating an entire, an entire mission around this idea that anyone can go ahead and create financial independence. Anyone can find their own identity and share it with the world. That also is a very valuable thing to have, the thing you are working on and the thing you personally care about, to have so much overlap on those two items.
Yeah, I love that phrase of the idea that how just that sense of like charging the battery and getting yourself to autonomy, but also the concept of like get people to fall in love with the same problem as you. I think that alignment is so important. And it reminds me of this quote that Jeff Marks told me. Jeff Marks is one of the writers of Avenue Q and the Book of Mormon, the incredibly popular musicals. And when he was working with his partner, he said that they would frequently come to a point where they would disagree about like how a scene should go or the lyrics to a song. And the easy decision to do was like to say, well, Jeff says that it should be this way and his partner says it should be this way. And so the only options are it's either his way, the other guy's way, or it's a compromise in the middle. And Jeff told me what I thought was one of the most insightful things that he'd ever told me was that there is a secret missing fourth option. And that's where you say, if it's not aligned with both of us, it's not good enough. And you just go back to the drawing board and write a whole new scene, a whole new song that you both are so in love with that you're both going to promote it with your full, like your full heart and energy. Because if you start to divert from that alignment, if you start to have little pieces of a bigger project where you say like, well, that wasn't my decision, and you can kind of like opt out of the responsibility and accountability for them, you quickly opt out of accountability for the entire project, and you don't put your heart behind actually making it a success. And I think like that concept of how you come to alignment with your partner is so important. And Tobi, maybe you could tell us, like, have you guys had a decision maybe between you and Harley where you guys have come to that sort of like butting heads about which direction you should go in, and how did you guys resolve that decision and find that path forward where everyone was aligned?
By the way, Josh, I think I hope everyone realized this was the soundbite that everyone should have tuned in for, because this is ridiculously good advice that you just shared. It absolutely echoes everything I've seen in my career. I would actually put in, like, if I had more time, I would probably put an impassionate plea for also taking the compromise option off the table, because that is, like, most of the products in the world are like extremely mediocre, right? The reason is everyone ending up settling for hybrid solutions that end up being compromises, and compromises, by the way, just importantly, will never end up with real strengths, because the thing that people disagree about is usually the edginess of something. So like a compromise always like like never resembles the spikiness of a really nifty idea. It always ends up resembling some kind of river stone that got ground up over time and is now like perfectly agreeable. So you really like do it one way, the other way, or generate new options. And I think that's a sentence we have a lot. Like we get in a lot of meetings and there's disagreement. We just say, hey, let's find new options. Like maybe we don't need to make a decision within the confines of a like of this, like the boundaries in with which we fought to make a choice in. Maybe if we step one step out of this particular box and play with boundaries a bit, we can actually circumnavigate the entire thing, right? Like, you know, that's like Shopify shipped with, what is it, supporting, I mean, initially 10 payment gateways, and then like I think we went up to 80. At some point we realized we should just ship with payments. Like no one can, like websites should just be able to accept money, and then that's how we did it. And hopefully we'll be able to deliver something around like this for the world of shipping again. Like if you step out of the confines in which you're trying to make a choice, you often see a better play, right? And that's important. I mean, I can, nothing terribly good example of this other than just, I can confirm that Harley and I have plenty of disagreements, and I mean, we've never taken something to the vote, have we? Like it's more like at some point just like there's an overwhelming obviousness to some approach or one way to go, and then we go with that.
Yeah, but it seems like you weren't able to convince him to take a profile picture with a better hat.
I think it's pretty. I think that's.
I like that.
Yeah.
Actually, you know, Toby, as you know, is a famous hat wearer, so I felt that I had to step it up a little bit. But it's you know, one of the things also, Josh, I think that is interesting on that point as well is this idea that the idea of compromise, for example, like Toby's example of Shopify, we had this thing called Active Merchant, which was our open source payment gateway library, which had, again, like, I think it was actually 95 payment gateways we had. And then this idea that adding another 5 payment gateways is probably the local maxima version of what we should be doing. But actually, what if payments just came stock inside of Shopify? That is a conversation that we constantly think of. How do we actually, like, forget what the next step is in this on this particular amount? And if you sort of zoom out and say, what do entrepreneurs need? What does small business need? They don't need to wait 48 hours to get a merchant account approved or provision a merchant account. They don't need to send their passport, you know, fax their passport to some bank in Utah. What they need is they need to be able to accept payments right away. And more, I think what we're trying to do is that just to continue to reduce any barrier to success that exists. And something that came up earlier, which we sort of jumped over quickly, is right now, if you were to think about Shopify as a retailer, we're not a retailer, of course, but if you were to pretend for a second that Shopify was a single retailer, we would be the second largest online retailer in America. Amazon's checkout would be the largest. The second would be Shopify's.
That's pretty incredible how far this has come so quickly. So I want to ask you another question, which is a little bit more forward-facing. We talked a lot about the vulnerability of entrepreneurs, and you know, some incredible insights so far. You know, you guys talked about you know, it's hard to build an e-commerce brand, but the cost of failure is about as close to zero as we've ever been, and that people are looking for this alternative career path. That, you know, that this is the moment that Shopify was created for, and that, you know, that as many people should be able to participate in the internet as possible. That you want to make your own game, and that, you know, especially when you have role models of people who've shown you what you can do with entrepreneurship in your life, you realize how malleable the world really is. You know, getting to those first 1,000 true fans matters more than like massive distribution, and that right now this is the moment, because small business formation is growing for the first time in a century. And, you know, I really love you guys talk about that entrepreneurship is working 100 hours for yourself so you don't have to work 40 hours for somebody else, and that sometimes failing makes you better at winning. And you talked about how some of the Shopify's biggest sellers actually had 5 failed shops first before they find the one that really worked. And that, you know, even though entrepreneurship is really hard and we should never glorify it, that you know, if you can get people aligned with the dream and the problem that you're trying to solve, you know, they're going to feel that sense of autonomy, and you're going to be able to trust them enough to do to, you know, sort of act as your second hand, and that's when you can really start to get a lot more done. And I do hope, and like Toby said, that the planet Earth starts to get a little bit more tired of fakeness, and that you need to really be able to charge your battery with trust and do what you say, so that people are willing to give you that autonomy. And that compromise can lead to mediocrity. That quote you said, Toby, of like a compromise is a river stone ground down over time to something perfectly agreeable, has no teeth anymore. It's like you're never going to be able to sink in to a market or really like connect to somebody if there's no edge to it. But with those are some of the amazing points that you guys shared so far. But so before we finish up, I want to ask, what are some trends or opportunities that you see for e-commerce entrepreneurs out there, or any entrepreneur, to seize on? Maybe that's new platforms that they should be jumping on, new forms of experimentation, being, we talked a little bit about being more vulnerable in public, or just writing in public, or, being more forceful about talking to your community and your network about getting, having them help you get off the ground. Maybe do you have any of those little pieces of advice about how to adapt to the future of e-commerce and entrepreneurship?
I think one thing that most people assume about Toby and I, because of the Shopify connection, of course, is that we think that the future of retail or commerce is online only. And actually, we don't think that. We actually think the future of retail, the future of commerce is everywhere. It's wherever consumers want to buy. And one of the reasons you're seeing us announce things with TikTok or with Walmart or with Instagram is that we think that the modern day town squares are online and they're offline, and they're actual town squares, but they're also in places like Clubhouse. And so part of what we're trying to accomplish is that when you come to Shopify, maybe you just want to sell initially online, but very quickly you may want to activate a physical channel, or you want to sell on some other marketplace, or you want to sell across social media. The idea should be that you as an entrepreneur, as a merchant, need to sell wherever your consumers are. And I think activating new channels. I was in a Clubhouse room a couple weeks ago and was just doing a Q&A about entrepreneurship, and someone basically just pitched me their company. It was a tea company. And she's like, hey, just come. This is not a question. This is just a pitch. And actually, I started buying tea from this person's company. She now has a way that if she has a way to engage a community in a place like Clubhouse, where most other tea companies are not even thinking about, that is amazing. And so I don't actually think that there is one way to do this. I think that there is anyone that's on here right now that is thinking about starting a business. First of all, figure out what you already do, what you already love, a gift that you already have. If you write a blog about soccer, maybe you should start selling soccer products to those people that are already engaged with you around that concept. But this idea that it's so precious and you have to create a business plan, I think that is ridiculous. I actually think that it is the best time ever. Again, it's not easy, and it certainly is not going to happen automatically to be successful. But there is no better time for entrepreneurship than right now, because of the tools and the access to a global consumer base. And I just want to also say, for those that are on the consumer side, for everyone listening, if you want more of these brands to exist, and I certainly do, we need to make sure that we buy from these independent brands. On the other side of this pandemic, if we want our communities and our cities to be interesting and to have character and have culture, we need to make sure these businesses exist. And so when you buy from these independent brands and these merchants, these entrepreneurs, you are actually voting that they need to exist in the world. And so this is just a call out to everyone listening. Please, support independent business, support local shops and merchants. This is so important. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but I couldn't miss the opportunity to give a shout out to all the entrepreneurs. And
I can't add anything to that. I think you close the loop perfectly here. It's again, there's Shopify is many things. Right now it's growing a lot, but it fundamentally represents a worldview that it's super important to enable people reaching for independence. Retail is only one area of that, which is the one we focus on. Other companies are also in this arena, and we cheer for them as well. And I think that's honestly the key thing that explains the company we invest in. We'll try to make it simpler and simpler and simpler to build these businesses. And maybe one plug is there's going to be an explosion of new channels coming that are going to help people find product market fit. It's going to be really, really exciting. I mean, obviously, live selling is somehow going to make it to the West in the next couple of years, and a lot of things like this. But just the website is so overlooked. Like people never like. I think this is sort of an interesting time right now because everyone, well, not everyone, but I certainly, and maybe some others, are tracking the conversations around Apple and what they allow in the stores and what they charge for and how much and so on. Like a lot of this conversation is really, really good, but just remember, the web browser could never be created now. Like the web browser is one of the most important things that I think has been created. It's one of the most complex pieces of software that has ever been made. It's one of the most amazing pieces of software that's ever been made. And it's the one place that can give you some, like where you can stake out territory for yourself. It's the one place on the web that you can own. The one place on the internet that you can own. Almost every other place where anyone can reach you is going to be rented. Now, that's not a bad thing, and often it's super worth it. But you can own your website. You can represent your brand with no middleman, and you can really tell your story. So make use of it. It's also going to outlast probably every other channel because it's very, very hard to imagine that the web would go fully away. So it's worth the investment, and I sort of shout out to my 90s internet sensibilities. Yeah.
I mean, those are almost, it almost might sound contradictory. It's like, oh, you want to be on these new platforms, places where everybody isn't, because you're going to be able to take advantage of it. When you join Clubhouse right now, it might seem like if you join today to Clubhouse, you might seem like you're late, but you're really so early still.
Yeah.
And on these new platforms, people are so much more generous with their follows, generous with their time versus these mature networks. But that said, on any social app, you are always kind of renting the space, and someone can always change your algorithmic distribution or what notifications you can send. And so building on a property which is totally unintermediated like the web is just such an important philosophy. I think you guys have done a great job of keeping the web something that's so important in commerce, and it not sort of all having to get buried inside of apps where there's fees and other types of control. So really thankful for you guys for that.
Thanks so much, Josh.
This has
fun.
This has been amazing. Fun. I would love to do this with you guys again if you're interested. It would be amazing to have you again on, Tobi. And if you guys do want to hear more from Harley, we're actually doing a talk, me and him, just a one-on-one on Friday at 1 p.m. Pacific, to just talk about the sort of his upbringing, his story of going from a t-shirt seller to president of Shopify, and what other people can learn about that journey through entrepreneurship. If you guys want to subscribe to that, if you just tap my little glowing face, either follow me or just hit the little press club button at the bottom. That's my club in the show that I run. And that's where we're going to have Harley on Friday, and we would love to have you as listeners for that. But otherwise, I hope that we get to do more of these, because there's a lot of sort of very casual talks on Clubhouse. There's a lot of really fun ones, but getting vulnerable and getting serious and talking about some of the real challenges that entrepreneurs face, and that it's not all 3 comma clubs and big fundraisers and and announcements in TechCrunch, that it's oftentimes 5 failures before you succeed, or as you guys said, the successful discovery of things that did not work. And so, I'll leave it with Tobi's quote from before, that we are in maybe the opening paragraphs of chapter 2 of a very long book on the topic of commerce. And so it is never too late to get started. So thank you guys so much for joining us, everyone here in the audience. Thank you for helping us break Clubhouse. I guess that's the phrase now. It means a ton to me. And I think it means a ton to these guys to get to share, a more vulnerable message than you might hear on your very professional and honestly, very exciting earnings calls. So thank you guys for joining us today.
Thanks, Josh. This is great. Thanks everyone for joining. It means a lot to us.
If you guys want some of the quotes
everyone.
from this talk, I'm sharing them on my Twitter. It's linked through my Clubhouse. Tobi and Harley have dropped just a ridiculous list of gems, and I've been taking notes this whole time. So if you want some of those, I've got a few of them up on my Twitter right now. But otherwise, I'll play you guys out with an appropriate jam, and otherwise see you, Harley, for our one-on-one Friday 1 p.m. with Press Club. And I'm also running a talk tomorrow night with Justin Kahn, co-founder of Twitch, and a bunch of the top journalists like Mike Isaac from the New York Times about the launch of Twitter Spaces, the new Clubhouse competitor, Facebook building their own Clubhouse competitor. So if you want to hear the great Clubhouse debate about what's going to happen with Clubhouse versus the big social platforms, join us tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Pacific on Press Club. But otherwise, just deeply thankful for you guys to get so real and so vulnerable, and the sort of the amour between you two, the fact that you guys have both, like you said, fell in love with the same dream, I think is truly inspiring. So thanks again for coming on, and thanks to everybody out there in the audience.